All right, today we're going to dive deep into a foundational text, the book of Deuteronomy. And in the process, challenge what might just be one of the biggest misunderstandings in Western history. We're going to peel back the layers of assumption and get to the core of some really powerful ideas. So, when you think about the Old Testament, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For a lot of people, especially coming from a traditional Christian perspective, the words are usually something like law, judgment, retribution. And that's almost always set up against the New Testament, which gets framed as the source of love, grace, and forgiveness. But is that really the whole story? Is it really that black and white? One of the most important religious thinkers of the 20th century argued that this belief, this idea that the Hebrew Bible is all about vengeance and the Gospels invented love, is a colossal mistake. So today, that's what we're going to investigate, using the book of Deuteronomy as our guide.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at that common misconception. Then, we're going to dig into Deuteronomy itself and see why it's really a book of love. That'll take us to the ancient Jewish roots of forgiveness, and from there to a really surprising idea about how cultures survive. And finally, we'll tie it all together with a profound definition of greatness that connects both testaments.
Okay, let's tackle this head on. The idea that the Torah is just some cold, purely legalistic document, it really doesn't hold up when you actually look at the text, especially Deuteronomy. It's not just a book that happens to mention love, it's a book that's fundamentally about love. And to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, get this. In the book of Deuteronomy, the concept of God's love for people comes up around 114 times. 114. The book is absolutely soaked in this language. This isn't some minor theme or a little footnote. It's the engine driving the whole narrative. And to put that number into perspective, let's compare it to another book in the Torah, Leviticus, the one famous for its focus on laws and rituals. Well, in Leviticus, the idea of divine love for people appears just twice. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Deuteronomy is clearly making a huge theological statement, hammering home again and again that this is a relationship built on love. And we're not talking about some vague implied love here. Nope, the text is super explicit. Just look at this verse from chapter 10. The language used is all about deep personal affection. This is not the cold, distant lawgiver so many people imagine. This is a core text describing a relationship that starts with a profound and very specific love.
So if Deuteronomy is just overflowing with love, what about forgiveness? The common story is that forgiveness was a New Testament innovation. But actually, the idea of forgiveness as a core value has incredibly deep roots in Judaism, where it was developed to pull society away from these destructive cycles of revenge.
And this is all wrapped up in the concept of silicha. Now, this is a crucial Jewish principle, and it's way more than just saying, I forgive you. It's this amazing ethical framework where the moral duty to start the process of forgiveness actually falls on the person who is hurt. Why? To deliberately break that cycle of vengeance that can tear a community apart. It's an act of choice to preserve society.
And this is a really critical point, slicha is a personal act, something that happens between people. It doesn't get rid of the need for social order. The source material is very clear on this. Love by itself isn't enough to run a society. It has to be paired with justice. You can't just have people committing crimes with no consequences. Personal forgiveness and public justice are two sides of the same coin, and they work together to create a humane and orderly world.
So this unique combination, love, justice, forgiveness, it had real, tangible effects throughout history. And it brings up a huge question. How in the world did the Jewish people, who often had no land, no military might, manage to endure for millennia while these massive, powerful empires just vanished? Think about it. When you picture the great empires of the ancient world, what do you see? When you think of their legacy, what did they build to show off their power and make sure they'd be remembered forever? The Mesopotamians, they built those towering ziggurats. The Egyptians, of course, their massive pyramids. The Greeks gave us the beautiful Parthenon, a temple to their gods and their own glory. And the Romans built the Colosseums, these giant arenas for spectacle and power. They're all monuments to strength, testaments in stone to imperial might. And the Jewish people, in contrast, they built schools. And that distinction, well, it's everything. While other civilizations poured their resources into building these physical monuments to power, Jewish civilization invested in an infrastructure of the mind and the spirit. This choice shaped their entire culture. Their heroes weren't just warriors, they were teachers. Their strongholds weren't fortresses, they were houses of study.
Their greatest passion was for learning, for the life of the mind. They understood that their most important job was to carefully pass this whole value system on to the next generation. That was their secret to survival. And this all leads us to the ultimate lesson from Deuteronomy. If a society's survival is all about its values, then what is the supreme value? The text gives us a pretty surprising answer, and it's one that builds a direct bridge from the ethical heart of Judaism to the most famous teachings of Jesus. So after the text establishes that God is the ultimate power, the God of gods and Lord of lords, it immediately defines what that power looks like in action. And what is that action? It's upholding the cause of the most powerless people in society, the orphan, the widow, and the immigrant, or the stranger. And there it is. That's the central idea. In Deuteronomy, greatness isn't defined by dominance or wealth or building giant structures. True, godlike greatness is defined by humility. It's about power being used to serve the powerless. This is really the ethical peak of the entire text.
Now, does that sound familiar? Let's listen to the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the merciful, blessed are the poor in spirit. It is the exact same ethical logic. The ones who are truly blessed, the ones who get the kingdom, are the marginalized, the humble, the merciful. Jesus isn't inventing some brand new morality here. He's quoting and channeling and amplifying a core principle straight out of the Torah.
So that leaves us with a final thought. This whole misconception that separates the testaments into law versus love, it really obscures this deep, profound connection. It hides the ancient origins of these ideas, that true greatness is humility, that survival is about education, and that loving the stranger is a divine command. You know, in a world that's still very much focused on building its own monuments to power, what would actually change if we took this 3,000-year-old lesson to heart?